In December 2017, in a Northern Territory town of 11 people, a 70-year-old man left the pub on a quad bike with his dog. Neither was ever seen again. A coroner later found he had been killed. That is where this list begins. That town is in Australia, and it is nowhere near the strangest story we found there. That place makes this list. So do 14 others. A settlement on the Nullarbor where 4 people live beside the longest straight railway on Earth. A salt lake where 51 steel figures stand scattered across 10 square kilometers, and the wind makes them whisper. A town in New South Wales that has been underwater for decades and occasionally rises back out. Make sure you stick with us to the end, because number 1 is a town the Australian government erased from its own maps, closed the roads to, and then bulldozed. This channel goes looking for the places that fall off the map. Subscribe if that is your kind of thing. Today, we are counting down 15 Australian towns you were never meant to find. Number 15. Wycliffe Well, Northern Territory. The Roadhouse the aliens abandoned. 375 kilometers north of Alice Springs. On the Stewart Highway, there is a building painted the color of deep space. Galaxies, exploding stars. It started as a water well built in 1875 and later became a wartime army farm, growing food for troops heading to Darwin. The servicemen stationed there kept a journal of unidentified objects in the sky, and it prompted an investigation by the Royal Australian Air Force. The Roadhouse kept that log going for decades. In 1985, a former Royal Australian Navy sailor named Lou Farkas bought the place. The previous owners then told him about the sightings. They had kept quiet about them so as not to spook prospective buyers. Farkas did the opposite. He installed a UFO landing pad, covered the interior walls with clippings, and declared Wycliffe Well the UFO capital of Australia. The promotional line was that if you stayed up all night and saw nothing, you were unlucky rather than lucky. In late December 2022, a flash flood destroyed the Roadhouse. The bathrooms are still labeled Malians and Femalians. The alien mannequins outside have been decapitated. Reported sightings dropped off once the place closed. Whatever was out there apparently lost interest at exactly the same time the lights went out. Number 14. Yarraka, Queensland. The town where the birds won. There is a sign at the door of the Yarraka Hotel in central West Queensland stating that emus have been banned from the establishment for bad behavior. The permanent population of the town is under 20. In 2018, local wildlife caretaker Leanne Byrne found an abandoned emu nest nearby and hatched the eggs herself using an electric blanket. There were 8 birds. All but 2 eventually moved on, apparently looking for mates. The 2 that stayed were Kevin and Carol, and they grew up with no fear of people whatsoever. For a while, this was excellent for business. Then the pair worked out they could climb the pub's front steps. Taco owner Jerry Gimblett told The Guardian the birds were stealing food from guests and pulling toast out of toasters. But the deciding factor was the droppings, which were enormous and stained badly. The fix was a rope across the top of the stairs. The owners conceded on television that they were not certain the emus could read the sign, so a physical bar went up as well. They also leaned through caravan doorways and drink an entire mug of coffee off the table without spilling it. You simply discover the mug is empty. They are still down there at the bottom of the steps, looking up, waiting for somebody to forget the rope. Number 13. Kootenay, Western Australia. A horse walks into a bar. Kootenay sits on the Golden Quest Discovery Trail, 706 kilometers from Perth and 113 kilometers north of Kalgoorlie-Boulder. Gold was found near the site in 1895. The town site was declared in 1899. By 1903, Tourism Western Australia records 400 buildings, a population of 2,320, 2 red light districts, a racecourse, and 7 hotels. By 1907, the population was over 3,500, with 11 hotels, a brewery, a public swimming pool, and 4 trains a day arriving from Kalgoorlie. The cracks showed within 3 years of that peak. The mine limped on into the 1,920 seconds, but most people had already gone, leaving houses and cars to fall apart in the sun. Around a dozen residents are left in the town itself. The single pub also serves as the post office and the general store. The old miner's cottage is the last timber and iron building standing from the turn of the century. And for roughly a decade now, a former racehorse named Willie has walked into the Grand Hotel every day for a feed. Local tourism material counts him as the town's 14th resident. 13 people are what remains of 3,500, and not one of them seems to mind sharing the bar. Number 12. Useless Loop, Western Australia. The town you are not allowed to enter. The name is an insult that stuck. In the early 19th century, the French explorer Henri Louis de Salses de Freycinet charted the inlet, found a large sandbank blocking the entrance, and wrote it off as Havre inutile, useless harbor. More than a century later, the exact quality that made it useless for shipping made it perfect for something else. The water is hypersaline, the evaporation is relentless, the isolation is total. A solar salt operation was established there in 1962. A joint venture was formed with Mitsui in 1973, and Mitsui took full ownership in 2005. In 2015, the site exported 1.4 million tons of salt. NASA has photographed the ponds from orbit. Seawater flooded in, concentrated by the sun, moved through a system that now comprises over 50 ponds. Around 70 employees and their families live there, and that is the entire town. There is no public transport. Access is restricted to staff and family. The nearest services are at Denham, about 80 kilometers away, by road. They are not just salt workers either. In 2001, the community won a Banksia Award and the Banksia Gold Award for a project protecting and relocating burrowing bedongs, western barred bandicoots, and greater stick-nest rats. The town sits inside the Shark Bay region, though it is excluded from the Core World Heritage property. Here is the thing. A tourist standing at Denham is 25 kilometers away across the water, looking straight at it, and cannot legally drive there. Some of the most photographed coastline in the country, and the only people permitted up close are the ones who clock on. Number 11. Betoota, Queensland. Population 0. The sign at the town entrance reads, "Welcome to Betoota." Population 0. Elevation 70 meters. Betoota was established in 1885 for one bureaucratic reason: a customs post collecting tolls on stock routes running between Queensland and South Australia. It grew in 1895 when construction of the rabbit-proof fence brought workers west, and the town gained a police station, a grocery store, a courthouse, and a hotel. Then, Federation arrived in 1901. The interstate border became meaningless, and the town's entire purpose evaporated. The wind down was slow and occasionally absurd. A police station with a court was built in 1915 and closed in 1930, after an inspection in 1928 found that nobody had been taken into custody or placed before the court in more than 5 years. Eventually, there was one building and one man. The Polish-born publican Zygmunt Yermolienko owned the Betoota Hotel for decades and was the town's sole resident. He charged customers according to how much he liked or disliked them. He kept the bar fully stocked after retiring, despite not drinking. He was known to occasionally produce a firearm during confrontations with passing travelers. Robert Haken, a smash repairer from Brisbane, tells a story that is the whole town in miniature. 30 years ago, he stopped for a beer, and when an impatient driver in a Range Rover told them to hurry up, Yermolienko slowed down, served Haken, took his money, then walked back to the Bowser and raised the price of petrol before serving the other man. The hotel closed in 1997. Yermolienko died in 2004. Haken later bought the pub and restored it, and the town now comes alive a few times a year for the races and desert events. It sits alone on a gibber plain where the temperature can pass 50 degrees 170 kilometers east of Birdsville and 227 west of Windora. One man, one building, and a petrol Bowser he used as a personality test. Number 10. Menzies and Lake Ballard, Western Australia, the town that stripped naked for art. Gold was discovered at Menzies in 1894. The rush lasted about 10 years. By 1905, most of the miners had gone elsewhere, and by 1910, the population was under 1,000. Today, it generally sits below 100, rising and falling as local mines open and close. The town hall got a clock tower. It did not get a clock. The original was lost in the wreck of the RMS Orzava off Garden Island in 1905. The Shire of Menzies records that all passengers and crew were rescued, and a considerable amount of cargo salvaged, but nobody knows what happened to the clock, whether it went to the bottom or was recovered and quietly sold to somebody else. The tower stood blank for over 100 years. A clock was finally installed in 2000. Then, in 2003, the town did something considerably stranger. The sculptor Antony Gormley, a Turner Prize winner, was commissioned for the Perth International Arts Festival's 50th anniversary. He came looking at the geology and found the town instead. He asked the residents of Menzies to be laser-scanned naked, and 51 of them agreed. Their scans were reduced by 2/3 in lateral dimension, producing tall, thin figures cast in a stainless steel alloy containing molybdenum, vanadium, and titanium, metals found in the Archean rock of Western Australia. The 51 figures were placed across 10 square kilometers of Lake Ballard, a dry salt lake reached on a 50-kilometer dirt road west of town. They were meant to be removed when the festival ended. Nobody took them away. Each figure carries a small hollow passage running from the neck to the small of the back, left behind by the casting. It traps the breeze coming across the lake. The sculptures whisper. 100 or so people handed a stranger their bodies and got back a crowd that never leaves. Number 9. Cook, South Australia. Our hospital needs your help. Get sick. Cook was built in 1917 by Commonwealth Railways when the Trans-Australian Railway opened, and named after the former Prime Minister Joseph Cook. It exists in the middle of the Nullarbor Plain for one reason. Steam locomotives could not cross that country unassisted. At its height, it was a serious operation. More than 50 employees handling track maintenance and rolling stock repairs. A general store, a golf course, a hospital, a primary school, and a swimming pool. It sits on the longest stretch of dead straight railway in the world, 478 kilometers without a bend. Families depended on the weekly tea and sugar provisions train until it stopped running in 1996. Water was ultimately brought in by rail. In 1942, a prisoner of war camp was set up there, with Italian prisoners assigned to work on the line. The hospital has the best story. In 1932, Sydney's Archbishop made a public appeal for a doctor to run a new bush hospital at Cook. He warned that a generous salary could not be paid, but promised that whoever took the post would be provided with an aeroplane. The Bishop Kirkby Memorial Hospital opened in 1937 and served the community for 6 decades, treating more than 900 patients a year and doubling as the town's weather station, with the nursing staff keeping the official meteorological records. Its advertising was hand-painted on rusting steel boxes near the old school and the train line. If you're a crook, come to Cook. And beneath it, our hospital needs your help. Get sick. Then technology dissolved the reason for the town. Reliable diesel locomotives, concrete sleepers, and continuously welded rail made resident staff redundant. The population fell from 200 to 4. The hospital is long gone. The invitation is still out there on a rusting box, waiting for somebody to take it up. Number 8. White Cliffs, New South Wales, the town that went underground. From the air, it looks like a moonscape. An estimated 50,000 disused diggings pocking the ground like small craters. It began by accident. Kangaroo hunters were working the area, and one of them, tracking a wounded animal over some low, stony hills, picked up a stone he liked the look of. A jeweler confirmed it was opal. When the group filed their claim, opal had not yet been listed as a gemstone, so the paperwork went through under the Gold Mining Act. Thousands came. In 1902, the population reached around 5,000 in the winter months. But building materials were scarce and expensive, and the summer heat was unbearable. The town holds the Australian record for the most extreme temperature range, with summer highs regularly in the 40s and often climbing into the 50s. So, from around 1894, the miners stopped building upward and started living in the shafts they had already dug. The hills are solid sandstone, so the dugouts were in no danger of collapse, and the temperature inside sits at roughly 20 to 22 degrees all year. There are still around 140 underground homes. At the 2021 census, White Cliffs had a population of 156 and 106 private dwellings, and the majority of those dwellings are below ground. There's one more oddity. Australia's first solar power station was built here in 1981. Researchers had proposed a site at Fowler's Gap, but, according to the account published by ANU Press, the Premier's press secretary wanted somewhere even more remote, and White Cliffs got it. The primary school has run continuously since 1895. Above it, the Pioneer Children's Cemetery from 1890 to 1892 records exactly how hard the early years were. The strange part is not that people live underground. It is that nobody down there finds it strange. We opened this video with Larima, and that story is still coming, at number 3. If you're enjoying the deep dive so far, drop a thumbs up and tell us in the comments which of these towns you would actually visit. It genuinely helps more people find these stories. Number 7. Yerrinderee, New South Wales. The town Sydney cut loose. Silver was found in the ranges southwest of Sydney in the 1870 seconds, and commercial production began in 1899. Between 1900 and 1912, the mines yielded 5,381,000 ounces of silver, 9,951 ounces of gold, and over 12,000 tons of lead. In the years immediately before the First World War, more than 2,000 people lived there. The war took the miners. A strike at Broken Hill shut production. The silver ran low, and the industry collapsed in 1927. But that is not what finished Yerrinderee. Engineering did. Sydney needed drinking water, so Warragamba Dam was built, and the Burragoring Valley was flooded to create Lake Burragoring. Contemporary reporting called it Doom Valley, describing slopes being cleared ahead of the inundation and 150 remaining inhabitants who would be driven from their homes and farms. The road connecting Yerrinderee to Sydney went under with everything else in 1959. A town roughly 60 kilometers from Sydney as the crow flies became a long, unsealed drive from Goulburn or Oberon. There has been no access from Picton or Camden since. Aubin Rene Lade's mining company had bought the entire town in 1947. When he understood what the dam would do, he sold it to his daughter Valerie in 1956. She sued the Sydney Water Board, received £3,000 in compensation, and then spent her life turning the place into a preserved heritage site instead of letting it rot. The country singer Frank Ifield recorded a song about it. Today the post office, tailor shop, general store, bank and miners' cottages have been restored, and a bridge has been installed over one of the large shafts at Silver Peak Mine, so you can look straight down into it. Aboriginal groups occupied that country for over 20,000 years, and nobody ever established what the word Yerrinderee actually means. Sydney still drinks the water that took the road away, and almost nobody drinking it knows the town is still up there. Number 6. Farina, South Australia. The town named after a lie. Farina is Latin for flour. That was the pitch. Run of unusually wet years in the late 19th century convinced a handful of farmers that the country north of the Flinders Ranges could grow wheat and barley, and the township was founded on that belief in 1878. They named it for the crop they were certain was coming. It was a meteorological fluke. The rain went back to normal. What they had not been told about was Goyder's Line, the boundary marking the point beyond which South Australia is simply too arid to farm. Farina sat on the wrong side of it. The wheat never came. The town survived anyway, on the railway and the stock routes. At its peak, more than 600 people lived there, with 2 hotels, a bank, a school, 2 breweries, a general store, a church, 5 blacksmiths, a brothel, and an underground bakery. It was strikingly multicultural for its time, with Aboriginal, Chinese, European, and Afghan residents living there together. Then the railway line was relocated in 1980, and Farina became rubble on a map. Except travelers kept stopping. In 2008, the Farina Restoration Group formed, and they chose the one thing the desert had preserved: an oven built underground in the late 1800 seconds as a meat store, still structurally sound after a century. Now, from late May to late July every year, around 200 volunteers travel out there. Stonemasons, retired bakers, teachers, gray nomads. They fire the underground ovens, sell bread to the 20,000 or so tourists who pass through annually, and put every cent back into restoring 9 buildings: the hotels, the post office, the police station, the bakery itself. And then, after 8 weeks, the queue is gone, the fire is out, and Farina goes back to being a ghost town for the rest of the year. A town built on a mistake about rain, kept alive by the one thing that never needed any. Gwalia, Western Australia. 3 days to empty a town. On the 28th of December, 1963, the knockoff whistle blew at the Sons of Gwalia mine, and the owners announced the mine was closed. 250 men were out of work. 3 days after Christmas, the population fell from around 1,200 to 40 in under 3 weeks. Trains were dispatched from Kalgoorlie, 230 kilometers south, to help people move. Most took only what they could carry. Families packed a bag and left homes, furniture, and belongings behind. By the next morning, nearly everyone was gone, racing south to be first in line for a job on the Golden Mile. To understand why it collapsed that fast, you need the beginning. In 1897, a London firm, Bewick, Mooring and Company, sent a 23-year-old American mining engineer up from their Coolgardie office to inspect a promising gold reef. He reported favorably. The firm bought the mine that November, and he was appointed its first manager. His name was Herbert Hoover, and he would later become the 31st President of the United States. By 1902, the mine employed nearly 900 men. The workforce was largely Italian and Yugoslav immigrants, living in cottages made of corrugated iron, bush timber, and Hessian bags. One resident built a fence around his backyard, entirely out of old bed frames. The town had Western Australia's first government-owned hotel, the State Hotel, built specifically to stamp out illegal alcohol production. But Gwalia was never gazetted as a town site, despite repeated campaigns by its residents. It had no legal existence and no economy of its own. When the mine went, there was nothing underneath it. By the 1950 seconds, it had been running at a loss for years. People left tables set for dinner, and eggs still sitting in the nests in the chookyards. The mine administration buildings are now a museum, and Hoover House operates as a bed and breakfast on the hill above a vast open pit. Australia's only surviving timber. Incline head frame still stands over the shaft, and restored cottages let you walk through a town frozen in December 1963. 60 years on, you can still stand in somebody's kitchen and work out roughly where they were when they heard. Number 4. Old Adaminaby, New South Wales. The town that comes back in droughts. In the middle of 1957, people in a small town in the Snowy Mountains began watching water creep out of a gorge below them and start filling their valley. 18 months earlier, a concrete wall had gone up across the Yucumbene River, out of sight of the township. Nobody in town watched it being built. They just saw the result arrive one day and keep coming. The town had been established in 1830 and held around 700 people. 1954, residents voted by referendum on a new site, 7 kilometers to the northeast. Over 1956 and 1957, 102 buildings were physically removed and relocated. The work was punishingly slow, hampered by one of the wettest years on record and heavy winter snows. Some farming families refused to go until the water was lapping at their doorsteps, then abandoned stoves and farm equipment when the roads were cut. The stone buildings, including the pubs, were bulldozed. Lake Yucumbene was the first and largest dam of the Snowy Mountains scheme, a project of enormous national pride and one of the great engineering achievements in Australian history. It is also why an entire township lay under more than 70 meters of water for close to 60 years. It has surfaced 3 times. Briefly, in the early 1980 seconds. Again, during the drought of the early 2000s. Then fully in 2018, when almost 80% of the lake had been drawn off for drought-hit irrigators and East Coast electricity demand. Locals used the sloping main street of the drowned town as a boat ramp. There is one detail that stops people cold. When the water is low, the shoreline is scattered with 1,950 seconds crockery and farm tools, lying exactly where they were left. The silt over the site is in places up to 30 centimeters deep. A McDonald truss bridge over the Yucumbene was partly dismantled in 1957. People expected it to collapse. They even tried to burn it down. It resisted and stood there as the water rose around it. The site is now on the New South Wales State Heritage Register, and the listing explicitly records the displaced community's sense of loss carried by their descendants. The people who left have never really stopped watching the water level. Number 3. Larrimah, Northern Territory. 11 people, 1 missing man. The strangest thing about Larrimah, for most of its life, was the panther. In the 1,960 seconds, a puddle formed outside the pub, grew, and became known locally as Larrimah Lake. The publican responded by installing a giant pink panther on its edge, holding a fishing rod. The panther was repeatedly stolen. Owners received ransom notes. It once turned up on a pub roof in Tennant Creek. A later publican built a zoo on the site with more than 700 birds plus wallabies and crocodiles. The town itself sits on the Stewart Highway, 430 kilometers south of Darwin. It has no police station and no mobile phone reception, and the nearest major town is 158 kilometers away. It is a former Tidy Town Award winner. Its population is 11. Paddy Moriarty was Irish-born. He came to Australia in 1966 and moved to Larrimah in 2008, buying a disused service station and making a home there. He worked for the hotel, doing gardening, cleaning, and maintenance. His routine was fixed and known to everyone. A walk to the local dump, then the Pink Panther bar for 8 beers, then a few hundred meters home on his quad bike. On the evening of Saturday, the 16th of December, 2017 at dusk, he left the hotel with his red Kelpie Kelly. Nobody reported it immediately. It took 2 days of him not turning up at the pub. No trace of Paddy or the dog has ever been found. Northern Territory Police concluded he had been murdered and offered a $250,000 reward, with the lead detective making the obvious point publicly that a 70-year-old man and his dog do not simply vanish from a town that size. At the 2022 inquest, Coroner Greg Kavanaugh found that Paddy and his dog died the night they went missing, and that he was killed in the context of, and likely because of, ongoing feud with his nearest neighbors. The court heard a long history of disagreements involving allegations of poisoned plants, a stolen umbrella, and a kangaroo carcass dragged onto a property. Nobody has been charged. The case became a Netflix documentary, Last Stop Larrimah, and inspired a drama series called Population 11. Paddy's house at 37 Stewart Highway went to auction in 2024, and the reward poster still stands out the front of the pub. There is a blind crocodile there, named Ray, who is about as much help to investigators as anything else in town. 11 people are still there. So is the sign. So is the question. Number 2. Maralinga, South Australia. The name means thunder. It was taken from Garrick, an extinct Aboriginal language, and, as researchers have pointed out, not one that was ever spoken in that part of the country. Somebody chose a word from somewhere else and stuck it on the map. After 2 tests at Emu Field in 1953, Britain formally asked for a permanent site on Australian soil, and the Maralinga Prohibited Area was created. Construction of the airport and village took 16 months, bankrolled by the British and Australian governments, both of whom ignored the Maralinga Tjarutja people who had lived on that country for thousands of years. 7 nuclear bombs were detonated at Maralinga between 1956 and 1963. The first was codenamed One Tree. It was fired from a steel tower over the Saltbush on the 27th of September 1956 and produced a 15-kiloton blast comparable to the device dropped on Hiroshima. The protection of the traditional owners from fallout and the cleanup afterwards were both handled notoriously badly. Decades later, hundreds of warning signs were erected, one every 50 meters around the test site and at the burial pits holding contaminated topsoil and irradiated equipment. Some of them were written in local language, telling Aboriginal people they could hunt there, but not camp. Nobody had asked the Maralinga Tjarutja what they wanted first. The community had already decided, on their own terms, that they would not return to live. Maralinga Tjarutja, Chairman Jeremy LeBoy, has said his grandparents saw that land as Mamu, an evil place they would not go back to. People today, he says, understand the radiation and the testing, and would visit but not live there. The land came back in stages. Freehold title in the 1,980 seconds, more in 2009, and in 2014 the federal government returned the final 1,782 square kilometers. The burial pits are monitored and have shown no leakage. Arpansa found that a person living at Maralinga full-time would receive no more than 5 millisieverts a year, even in the most contaminated areas around Taranaki, and that casual visitors who do not disturb the soil would receive less than 1 titance. And then the traditional owners did something nobody expected. They opened it. Maralinga Tjarutja set up a tourism business running tours of their own country and its test sites. 4 people now live in the village full-time. 2 lodgings have been built among the old buildings with hot water and Wi-Fi. Robin Matthews, Australia's only nuclear tour guide, tells visitors plainly that there is still radiation there and that it poses little danger unless they choose to eat mouthfuls of dust. He first came to Maralinga in 1972 as a truck driver, back when all the records from the 1,950 seconds were still sitting in the filing cabinets. They could have locked the gate and walked away. Instead, they started telling people what happened here in their own words. Number 1. Wittenoom, Western Australia. The town they deleted. The gorges here are deep red, iron-stained rock, spinifex, heat coming up off the ground in sheets. It is quiet in a way most places never manage. No traffic, no aircraft, just wind moving grid across open country. It is one of the most spectacular landscapes in Western Australia. The wind is also the reason you are not permitted to be standing in it. In the early 1,930 seconds, Lang Hancock found blue asbestos in a Polbarra gorge and began mining it in 1937. He named the place after Frank Wittenoom, his partner at the nearby Mulga Downs station. In 1943, the mine was sold to a subsidiary of the Colonial Sugar Refining Company, Australian Blue Asbestos, and by the late 1,940 seconds, the operation needed somewhere to house its workers and their families. So a town was built. It became the largest in the Polbarra. Between 1943 and 1966, More than 165,000 tons of asbestos came out of the ground there. Around 2,000 people lived in Wittenoom at its peak, and roughly 20,000 passed through it over the years. Workers, wives, children. The tailings were everywhere. They surfaced the streets with them. Mining ceased in 1966. What followed was one of the slowest demolitions in Australian history. From 1978, the state began phasing the town site down and encouraging residents to relocate. Buildings were demolished between 1986 and 1992. The nursing post closed, the police station closed, the airport was officially shut in 1993. In December 2006, the government removed the town's official status and shut off the power grid. In June 2007, the Minister for Regional Development, John Ford, confirmed the town site had been degazetted. Its name was removed from official maps and road signs, and the Shire of Ashburton was empowered to close the roads leading into contaminated areas. In 2008, it was declared a contaminated site. The University of Western Australia's Occupational Respiratory Epidemiology Group records that at least 1,200 former Wittenoom residents and workers have died of lung cancer and mesothelioma. Of roughly 1,500 people diagnosed with mesothelioma in Western Australia since the first recognized case in the early 1960s, around 300 came from that one town. A 2011 state government release described it as the greatest occupational health and safety tragedy in Australia, and drew comparisons to Chernobyl and Bhopal. It is the largest asbestos-contaminated site in the Southern Hemisphere. By 1999, about 30 people were still living there. By 2019, there were 3. At the 2021 census, the recorded population was 0. Here is the detail that stops people cold. It is illegal to travel there. Its name and location are not printed on government-endorsed maps. Encargini National Park, one of the most popular destinations in the state, borders the contaminated area. So tourists keep arriving anyway, and unauthorized visits can lead to prosecution. A brush fire in late 2022 destroyed the last remaining structures. Demolition of what was left began in May 2023, and the buildings were buried. The fibers are still in the ground. The cemetery is still there too. It is the one thing everybody agreed to leave standing, and the families of the people buried in it are still waiting to be told when they are allowed to visit. There are dozens more of these drowned towns, closed towns, towns with one resident that did not make the cut. My own favorite is Cook, because a hospital that advertised for patients on the Nullarbor is the most Australian thing I have ever read. Which of these surprised you most, and which town did we miss? Tell us in the comments. And if you want more of this, subscribe.